Welcome to the Association 100 podcast. The A100 podcast is an extension of our Association 100 bi-monthly newsletter that focuses on best practices, top trends, helpful ideas, and smart strategies and tactics that work in the world of associations. The podcast will feature meaningful conversations with association professionals across the country, taking a deeper dive into trending topics, offering insights that both inform and inspire.
Welcome back to another episode of the A100 podcast. I'm Colleen Gallagher, and I'm joined today by my co-hosts, Meghan, Henning, and Christine Stay. Today, we're going to talk about a really crucial topic for associations, and that's leadership development and succession planning. These are essential for the long-term success and sustainability of any association. So we'll be exploring why they're so important and also sharing some strategies for identifying and nurturing future leaders as well. It's all about ensuring that our associations are equipped with capable leaders who can steer them towards success. To kick things off, let's chat about why leadership development itself is crucial for associations. Leadership isn't just about guiding today's efforts, it's about preparing for tomorrow. And that's why developing future leaders is so critical for associations out there, because it ensures that we have the right people in place to navigate future challenges, drive growth, and fulfill our missions effectively. Investing in leadership development, it's an investment in the future sustainability of the organization. It's all about avoiding pitfalls of stagnant leadership and just making sure that our associations don't just survive, but they can thrive in changing environments. Effective leaders, they inspire and they motivate. They don't drive fear. They foster innovation. They adapt to new landscapes. Without a focus on cultivating these kinds of skills among emerging leaders, you're risking falling behind. However, it's important too to recognize the risks associated with leadership changes. We've been through some of those, but a sudden or poorly managed transition, it can set your association back years. That's no joke. It really can. It's not just about having the leader in place, but ensuring that they're the right fit for the organization's culture and the strategic direction. So I want to unpack this a bit with you both. Christine, why do you think some associations struggle with leadership development? Is there something they're missing?
At the end of the day, it comes down to time and resources. I know on our podcasts in the past, we've talked about professional development with employees, and a lot of times it's the same thing. I don't have enough time to do this. I don't have the resources to do this. You have to set that time aside. A lot of associations also are just okay with the status quo. They're okay with just how things are going. And it's hard. It's hard to make that time, especially when they're always wearing different hats. You're constantly working. You're constantly doing things. So I understand it's hard to make that time to do, but you need to. Another thing is that I feel like a lot of associations are like, I'm too small for this. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if it's 2 or 3 people in your association or 200. You need to take the time to make this kind of plan. You are not too small to have that in place.
I agree. We have been on this podcast and talked about a crisis communications plan. And you could be 3 people in an association, or just as you said, or 300, but you still need a plan. And I think this is an example of where you also need a plan. Things happen. People's lives change. People leave their jobs. Even leaders leave their jobs. And sometimes without a lot of notice. And I think you do need to have a plan for that.
You're so right about people think we're too small, it doesn't matter. But when you think about it, those are the associations that matters for most, because everybody knows that leader. Every member knows that leader. And for them to step out, how much of an impact do you think they have on member recruitment and retention if everyone knew them? Probably huge. So all of a sudden, someone new comes in, they're not a great fit. Tons of people leave.
Yes.
Yep.
Meghan, can you think of any examples of how an association does this well when it comes to nurturing the next generation of leaders, and what strategies others could use to learn from?
Yes, this came from Christine. Offline, we had a conversation where you told the story, Christine, in an association that you worked, where there was a lunch and learn. And can you just recap that? Because I feel like this is such a great example that could be done by every association beginning tomorrow.
Of course. Yeah, they called it an open brainstorm, which it wasn't just upper management, executive level. It was everyone in the association. And everybody came in, they had lunch, and it was just an open forum discussion. And I think it also helped that association nurtured that kind of relationship where you didn't feel to speak up. You have to have that kind of relationship with your employees in order for this to work. If everyone's just going to stay there and shut up and not say anything, then obviously there's no reason to have something like that. But I really think that is a way that you can pinpoint those folks.
I love that example because it's one of those things that can have so many different benefits. One, who shows up at those events? Who cares, right? You're walking in the door at whatever level and you're interested in it. So if I'm a leader, I'm paying attention to who's in the room. I'm paying attention to who speaks up, to whose ideas I think are good. And again, any level, because there's maybe 50% of a leader is born with that. And then you cultivate it and you learn and you're constantly trying to hone it. It's not something you just wake up and you're the world's most wonderful leader. But I do think that if you're sitting in a room like that, you are getting a front row seat, maybe as a leader, to those that maybe you don't always work with, right? The joy of working your way to the top is that you're on the top, you're in your corner office, and maybe you don't work with every single person. So that leaves you a little bit removed. Whereas this example allows the leaders and potential leaders to all be together and to all be seen. And I just feel like that is something an association, upon hearing this today, could go out and do tomorrow.
Exactly.
Another really simple one that was an association Megan and I worked at. And every month they had a senior leadership meeting and they invited a different junior staffer to come take notes and listen in. And what an opportunity for someone to see what's going on in the whole association and to potentially nurture them up into a leadership role by giving them that front row seat, like you mentioned in the brainstorm, at what senior leadership is talking about, how those meetings go. I remember the first time I had been invited, I had no idea what an agenda for a senior leadership meeting would look like or how they'd be talking about the business of the association. That was so far beyond anything I knew yet as a first year working in an association. So things like that are really simple. One thing I'm seeing a lot of associations do right now, and this is not necessarily for the staff itself, but for members and thinking of board leadership, is I could name 5 associations off the top of my head that are doing emerging leader programs for their members. And what that's doing is developing a pipeline of future volunteers for their committees and their boards, which is another really important piece to think about with leadership development is it's not just internal. You need good leaders on both sides. So on the board side as well.
That's a great point because the more you train your members, the better advocates and ambassadors they are to your association and to your industry.
And as you were saying before, people can leave at the drop of a hat. That applies to the board leadership as well.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I know I say this, I've probably said this in 5 different podcasts we've done and more so about professional development. But that quote of, would you rather train someone and have them leave or not train someone and have them stay? What if they
So
stay?
true.
So train them. When it comes down to it, leadership development, it's not just a process, it's strategic and it's an imperative that it requires thought, it requires intention, the right tools. So by understanding its importance and then putting in effective strategies, associations can really ensure that they remain relevant and capable of achieving their goals. So from here, I'd like to shift into how we identify future leaders. So Christine, I'll turn it over to you to kick this conversation off.
Sure. The first thing I think is that you have to identify what are the skills, experiences, perspectives that you're looking for in order to fulfill the responsibilities and goals of your association. And this always circles back to the number one thing. What is your association mission statement? What is the overall goal of your association? And that's where you can identify, okay, first of all, what are the leaders that we're looking for? What are that skill set that we're looking for? And then that's when you can really start looking at the type of people and early identification is key the associations can benefit greatly from having this pipeline of talented individuals ready to step in the leadership roles when the time comes. So,
Yes.
as we were talking before about that open brainstorm session or the other ideas that we had, is just identifying, okay, first, what are we looking for in the people? And then you can start looking for that kind of skill set in the people within your organization.
I had never thought about this until right now, but do you think that should come into play in the hiring process? Because say you're looking for an IT person, right? And you really need them. But should you also think about when you're hiring someone, is this person a potential leader? Could we cultivate this person to be the next leader? Because having the pipeline, like you said, of talented individuals is really key. It definitely is. Because if you hire a bunch of people to just do the bare minimum, you never grow them, they never grow. Then it goes back to Colleen's statement. Then you've got an entire baseline that's not moving up. Everybody's supposed to move up. Your growth should be on an incline, as well as your talent, as well as growing and giving opportunities to those in your employment. There should be something that you're looking out. We definitely talked about this where you want to have all of this career development. But at the same time, this is also when I think managers and leaders need to think, hey, you know what the next step is for you? It's blend. And obviously have a conversation about are you both on board? But I do think that this is where the view from the top comes into play, where you could see the paths to getting your workforce on a leadership track.
I love the idea of what you're saying about the hiring process. And I think this also plays with identifying future leaders is looking at your organization chart. And a lot of associations we talk about that status quo. They've been having the same organizational chart for years and years. And it may or may not be working for you. And just looking at maybe on a yearly basis, seeing, okay, are most of our leaders coming from the membership department, the membership and marketing, and they're moving up. And that's the kind of background that we want for our leaders because they know all our members. They know how our members are thinking, like they can get inside their heads. So I think that goes into the hiring process too. Okay, just take a look at your overall organization as a whole.
Yeah. And one thing I'm always looking for and would advise any younger person looking to grow in their career is if you want to stand out and be recognized as that future leader, ask. Ask for work. Ask to do something that might not be in your purview. Do something. Show it to your boss and say, I thought this was a good idea. That kind of initiative, if you see that as a boss, you know that person has some growth potential. Even if it's not exactly what you needed, the fact that they're taking initiative to do something outside of their exact scope of work, I think a lot of people just now, this is my job. I'm going to do my job. I'm going to leave. That's it. When you have that person that's willing to go above and beyond, you know you've got someone special there.
Absolutely. That
Yeah.
is a really excellent because that again, a bell should be going off in a manager's brain that says, oh, hey, this is somebody to be paying attention to and to cultivate.
Yeah, and that plays in the role with the strategies that you can use to cultivate these leaders. And we'll touch upon it a little bit, but there's talent assessment programs, leadership training initiatives, mentorship opportunities to identify these people. But Colleen, again, like you said, it's nice to see the people that step up, ask, want to be a part of it. Those are the people that have that initiative that you definitely want. So, quick question. What are your thoughts, Colleen and Megan, on 360 reviews? Should leaders be received by their direct reports?
I have mixed feelings on the 360 review process. I think if it's done really right, it could potentially be beneficial. I think the problem is so often you get asked to review someone in another department or something like this when you're in places that do these and it feels awkward. You're not sure who's this going back to. What should I say? Do I want to give real feedback or I'm going to hurt their chance at a promotion? So it's hard to know how to respond to those. I think if an organization really takes time to say, this is what we're looking for, this is what we need out of these are the kind of responses we want, and then gives you time to do them. Because there's nothing worse than thinking, oh, I'm behind on 18 things today, but I also have to do 4 people's reviews because I got picked as the cross-departmental person to give them a review. I do think in terms of having leader be reviewed by some people that are under them, I think that's always helpful feedback. But again, it has to be an environment that fosters that kind of feedback and makes it okay for people to give that kind of feedback, because that's also a really tough position to put someone in to say, hey, you need to review your boss. And then they're thinking, uh-oh, they're going to know this is me. They're going to know what I said. Do I really want to do this? So I think in theory, they could be really beneficial. I think they're really hard to do well, if that makes sense.
I would agree. When I worked for MCI, which was a huge organization, there were 800 people in my department. And my department loved a 360 review. And they would have you write down, which this is now crazy to me to even think about, but you would list 3 people that you always worked with, right? So you'd write those people down. And then what person did you have the most challenge with? Because their point was, what would the person who has the hardest time with you say about you, right? And it wasn't something that you could write. So you couldn't write, God, I hate this person. There was none of that, right? It was multiple choice. And could you do this better? Could they do this better? And when you got back, I have to say that when you received your own reviews, you had some time to process them. And I would say, as I've said this millions of times throughout my career when I've managed people, your review should never be a surprise to you. That should never come as a surprise. You should absolutely know that I'm going to say you need to work better in these 2 areas and you're fantastic in these 5. But no one should leave a review crying. No one should be blindsided. No one should feel that way. And I would say that the first time I was there for 3 years, and the first time I did it, I was so sick to my stomach, right? I'm sick to my stomach writing it for other people and receiving it. But I will say that it was done in a way and allowed you to read it and process it. And then you went to your boss. Just my boss was like, it seems to me that you have to do X according to these 3 people. And for the most part, you're like, yes, I do. And I felt like it gave me an opportunity for the next year to really make inroads in that so that next year I wasn't getting the same review, right? I wasn't being told, you're still not doing whatever. You're still not working on this well. So I would agree with you, Colleen, that I think they have to be done well. I do think that, as I just described something that was terrifying, I think it's even more terrifying doing a 360 for your boss. But I also think at the same time, as somebody who has been a boss, it would be nice to know what are things that maybe you could do better. And if you come from that point of view, because you have to come from that point of view in my mind, you have to be able to say, I am not perfect. There are definitely things I can improve on. And what are those, as opposed to feeling threatened or attacked? Now we're going to switch to nurturing future leaders and fostering mentorship. So, how can associations foster a culture of mentorship?
I love this because I just picture taking somebody under your wing. And I worked for an association that they almost had like a buddy system. And it sounds so corny, but it really worked. And it was throughout the year, but really when it shined was during the annual conference. And somebody that was already a leader on the board or somebody during the conference would take that person under their wing, show them the ropes, network with them, because it can get very overwhelming. And if you're not familiar, especially if you're not familiar with your membership, and I feel as though it's nice to have that person side by side with you. So I love that kind of buddy system feel.
I do too. And it doesn't have to be so ridiculously formal that you're going to sit down in my office and tell me where you hope to be in 3 years, because everyone doesn't have an answer to that question. But I think it can be about, when I look back at my own mentors, I think of going to lunch with them and discussing different aspects of my personality and my life, and then them helping to say, you know what, you'd be really good at this. And I would be somebody who would not do well with, what is your 10-year plan? That would intimidate me and I would shut down. So I think that there are different ways. That isn't to say that there are people who absolutely could tell you where they want to be in 5 years right now. But I think that pairing the right people together, as you said, Christine, really is the key. It is a good buddy system.
I do think those informal settings work well. I did a formal mentorship program at one job, but the way it worked was you had a monthly lunch with your mentor. So it didn't feel all nervous, like sitting in their office and trying to be super professional. It was just a conversation, and you, you ended up learning so much more than I think if it had been that weird in their office kind of setting that you're talking about. I also think you hear so many leaders say, "My door is always open. My door is always open." But how many actually create the feeling that someone junior thinks they can walk in that door and ask a question anytime? So when you talk about how can you foster this culture of mentorship, is you really need to be accessible. And I know it can be hard because in some level with some junior staffers, they're always going to be intimidated by more experienced staffers. But you've got to be having those conversations with people at all levels so they see someone coming to you and asking something, and then that person can go to them and ask them, and so on and so forth. But you can't just say my door is always open and check a box and you're done. You have to actually create that environment for it to work.
Agree.
I was going to say, create that environment of trust that nothing is too stupid. The worst thing, you don't want to feel stupid going to a leader. So having that anything goes, anything can be said. And again, that trusting environment is so key for that.
Yeah, for sure. The last piece I wanted to touch on today was the actual transition when you do bring a new leader in, and transitioning smoothly during those leadership changes, because wow, is that crucial for keeping your members, for keeping your staff engaged, for just making sure nothing goes off the rails. So making sure these transitions are seamless, it's obviously key to maintaining stability and continuity. And we've talked a lot today about identifying and nurturing future leaders, but I'd like to shift focus to what happens when it's time to actually hand over the baton. So effective communication, detailed knowledge transfer, thoughtful succession planning, those are the pillars of smooth leadership transitions. And it's absolutely vital that associations have clear processes in place for transferring responsibilities, for documenting important operational knowledge, and preparing incoming leaders for their new roles. There are a lot of associations that, even if it's not the leadership level, but if a membership person walks out, there are so many times when they have so much institutional knowledge, all of a sudden nothing can get done. And you can't let that happen at any level, but especially at the leadership level, there needs to be a process and there needs to be documentation. So, Megan, I love your thoughts on that documentation and knowledge transfer in leadership transitions and how associations can better manage this really often overlooked aspect.
You're right with the communications. When I worked at the Global Business Travel Association, the night before our association's annual conference, I had on an external hard drive every script for every single person. And I remember saying to my boss, okay, look, this is where I'm putting this in case I'm hit by a bus on the way to the hotel, right? So we could joke about that could happen, but it could have happened. And then what would they have done? Then the scrambling would start. So that's a very small piece. And having a process, again, like a crisis communications plan to be put in place, because things do happen. People get sick, people leave, people have some unexpected life emergency and they cannot come. And the last thing you want to do is think, God, I have no idea what the membership person does. I don't know anything about renewals. I don't know anything about any of this. And I think that it should be an exercise where each person is responsible for putting together a document about what their job is. And it's a great exercise because people's jobs change, even within the course of their own job. You can sign up for, you get a job and here's your job description. And then in a year or 6 months, sometimes you have an entirely different job and no one's updated it. We used to have a process where you would update your job description, but I think this is part of it. And if you thought about it, where every single person that has a director or above had an entire document of what they do, what are important dates, who do they work with, who, if you're doing renewals and you say, here's the call list that we use at this point, and we usually go out at this point. I think that you could help yourself at least with the fear. If something happened, you could feel like, okay, we do have to fill this position and it is a little frightening and we are now under the gun, but we could totally handle this. It is having documents on the operational knowledge of your job and where you work with others too. You need to connect the dots and say, I send this to marketing, sends this out. All of those little pieces so that it's not fear. Again, that's why we have crisis communications plans. Something bad has already happened. We do not need to compound that with, oh my God, now we don't know how to handle it.
And you talked about the unpredictable nature in some cases. So it's not always a planned career transition or retirement. So Christine, how do you think things factor in differently when you're putting together a plan that works for both emergency transition, when it's something totally unexpected, as well as a regular transition that could be planned? How are you covering both those bases and anticipating that when it comes to leadership change?
Yeah, at the end of the day, the goal is just to mitigate risk. Without a succession plan, organizations, they're vulnerable to the risk of sudden departures or unforeseen events, like you were saying, not just the anticipated changes in leadership. So I think one, having a pool of trained successors and leaders, as we were talking about, having those people trained already in the pipeline, that provides that kind of safety net. We keep on talking about this is so similar to crisis communication plan, and it is almost performing like a SWOT analysis of your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, your threats. What could go wrong? Like having a meeting and sitting there and being like, what are we know pretty much the anticipated. What are the sudden ones that we're not dealing with? Just like life changes. I hate to say this, like deaths, things like that might just happen. You got to think about all those kind of things.
Yep, for sure. And then another important consideration is the emotional and cultural impact of a leadership change on your staff. This can be significant, and if not managed carefully, it can be really disruptive. And I know you all can't see me right now, but I'm laughing a little bit because Megan and I went through a very disruptive leadership change that was not well done in any way at one point in our careers. So, Megan, I'd love to know what you think are the right steps to help manage this and to make sure a new leader stepping in, it keeps that culture where it needs to be and brings that comfort level to existing staff or new staff that are coming in.
The succession plan needs to come as with a plan. It does need to come with a plan. It needs the steps laid out. And when I look back at what you just mentioned, you think, good Lord, that's a case study in what not to do. What should have been done was the stuff was happening behind the scenes from the staff and the scenes from the leaders. And again, I think that surprising people where they do not need to be surprised is a really bad idea. It breaks the trust of the entire culture, and I think you will pay for it. You have to have a plan in place that says, hey, if you are an executive director and you are thinking of leaving, could you give the association a year's notice? And once a year's notice has been given, then certain things go into motion, right? The plan starts to be executed and you start telling the staff. Because again, not telling your staff, you might think that this is the best thing for them. It is not. Having had a surprise, what I would feel like it felt was an attack, did not garner any loyalty to the association. In fact, it gave the exact opposite. So I feel if you could put some parameters around, I get it. Tomorrow you could decide that you do not want to do this, but most executive directors are not walking out the door. What are those parameters? Do you need 6 months? Do you need a year? Do you need 2 years? There are certain associations that they're global. And I would think you can't just leave in 6 months. And should you be part of the hiring process? Should there be a national search? Should you take part in that? And there are lots of those discussions. But again, I think that could be incorporated in the plan.
What I think so much of about it is communicating vision. So There are times when a new leader comes in and does intend to change things and does need to mix up the staff. But if that's not the case, you need to be really clear about your jobs are safe. This is what we're looking to do, but we need you on board with X, Y, and Z so that we continue to grow. Telling them those things,
Yes.
laying that out, making those really clear, that makes a big difference. And I like that you started talking about should leaders have to give significant notice at an association. So, Christine, as our all things operation, I would love your thoughts on this. Should there be policies around this? How could it benefit or hinder their planning? What do you think?
I know me. Type A. I love a good plan. I love when things are organized. So I'm all for having a policy, and that just keeps that role of stability and consistency within the association's employees, their members, their stakeholders. They rely on that consistent leadership to maintain trust, credibility, keep that membership. So I think that having a policy in place will maintain that stability to ensure that the policies, the strategies, that mission statement alignment remain consistent over time. And even things like you were talking about policy, a global association, they might have a different policy in a country where there's maternal leave for a year or two. That, and I should say maternal and paternal leave, that could affect the policy of new leadership and just planning ahead of time. Like those are things that you have to think about. Just an example. So that's why I believe a policy is really important. Obviously, knowing also that stuff happens and sometimes you can't plan for it. And sometimes people just have to leave and they probably would love to give their notice in advance, but they can't for XYZ reason. But I think having a policy and plan will mitigate a lot of that.
Yep, definitely. So the last concept I want to touch on today is having an acting leader. So in times of a sudden absence, like we've talked about, thinking that 25th Amendment type approach, but for associations. Meghan, what do you think? How can associations structure such a role or policy to ensure continuity without causing additional disruption in these kind of emergency situations?
As we've talked about, you have to ensure a smooth transition because it's not just about having a successor, it's about having a leader and about creating an environment where that new leader can succeed. And this would require planning and preparation and support on an ongoing basis, but not just items on a checklist to be marked off once a new leader is in place. The same way with the 25th Amendment, you do need someone to step in. And again, part of your plan should be who will be that acting leader, who will be able to help facilitate what needs to be done, not just the actual work, but to basically hold the association together, to give everybody the trust that they will require when something like that happens. Anybody who's lived through somebody leaving and then having an acting leader step in knows how stressful that can be. And having this transition in place will help with that.
Yeah, this was such a good discussion. And I think an area that associations don't always talk about or think about because it's down the road and it's never going to happen until it does happen. But just recap some of the really key takeaways when it comes to leadership development and succession planning. I would say the goal is not just to replace one leader with another, but to foster a leadership culture that permeates the entire organization. We talked about that a bit today. It's about building resilience and ensuring that every transition enhances the association's capacity to fill its mission more effectively. Christine, you mentioned that coming back to the mission a couple times today, and that's so important. The goal of an association, I've said a few times, member recruitment, member retention, it always comes back to that member value proposition. And leadership's role in that is so critical. So a leadership transition is crucial for the long-term health of any association. So I hope our conversation really helps some people out there today and helps our listeners as they navigate these changes in their associations. And thank you to everyone for tuning in for another episode of the A100. We'll be back next week with more. Thanks, guys.
And that's a wrap on today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Association 100 podcast, brought to you by the A100 publishing team, powered by Onward and Upward Marketing and Communications. You can subscribe to the Association 100 podcast on Spotify so you'll never miss out, or listen via our website at theassociation100.com. Follow us for all the latest insights and trends impacting the world of associations. Thanks for tuning in.